Good morning and welcome, Mount Zion. And to all of you who have joined us live and also virtually in this space here at Mount Zion on this Saturday morning, we welcome you to our very first collaboration with the Department of Veterans Affairs entitled Adapt and Overcome, a response to veterans' needs in our community. And certainly, if there's anybody that we want to take care of in our community, it is those who have taken care of us. Amen? Amen. So today, we have partnered with the Department of Veterans Affairs to talk about two very pronounced issues in our community, and that would be suicide and also homelessness in our community. And again, as the Associate Pastor of Congregational Care here at Mount Zion, we want to make sure that we take care of all of our congregants, but specifically today, we are focusing in on taking care of our veterans. So today we have some experts here who are going to kind of share on those two issues, but before I bring them up, we certainly want to invite God into this space and to make sure that everything is in order and God's glory is felt amongst us. Amen? Amen. Let us pray. God, how we love you on today and how we continue to thank you, God, that you are the giver of life. And so, God, on today as we come, God, before you, we know, God, that it is your desire, oh God, for your people to experience life, God, but you have told us, God, that we can experience it more abundantly. And so, God, today as we have gathered with the Department of Veterans Affairs, we just ask, God, for your glory to fall, God, in this place, God, as we continue to try to provide and take care of those whose lives have been compromised in any way in our community. So, God, we welcome you into this space. We ask, God, that your glory will fall so that when we leave from this place, God, not only, God, will we know that your presence has been here, God, but the veterans that are amongst us and also in the virtual space will know, God, that you and Mount Zion cares for them. God, we give you the glory now in Jesus' mighty name. Amen. Amen. At this time, we are going to welcome Mr. Conrad Washington to the platform. He is the director of the VA Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. Let's welcome him as he comes.
All right, well, thank you, Pastor. I appreciate it. It's a blessing to be here. The office that I'm responsible for is called the VA Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. We have been traveling around this entire month, advocating and celebrating our veterans, right, throughout the nation. We just came back from Indiana, so if I sound a little hoarse, please forgive me. But again, the Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships, we collaborate with faith-based organizations and community organizations across the nation, right? And we have a very robust program with the 4 people that work for me out of Washington, D.C. But please go to our website if you want to know how to connect with us. You can go to Google and just type in VA Center for Faith-Based, and all the information will pop up. So let's keep the ball rolling here because we do have a full schedule today. I'd like to introduce to you the Deputy Executive Health System Director from VA Tennessee Valley Healthcare System, VHA, Michael B. Renfro. He was appointed Deputy Executive Health Director, SCS, Tennessee Valley Healthcare in September 2001. Mr. Renfro previously served as a Deputy Director at VA Patient Experience Program from 2019 to 2021. Mr. Renfro is an Air Force veteran. Thank you for your service, sir. Even though it's Air Force, I'm a retired Marine, it's okay, all right? Serving on active duty from 2002 to 2008 and in the Maryland Air National Guard. I give you Mr. Renfro.
I'm glad you didn't try to read all of that. That was quite a lot on the screen there. So I know you were told that you were going to hear from a lot of experts this morning, and that is not me. So I have the privilege of introducing the actual experts. But I want to say a few things to get us started here this morning. So adapt and overcome. We have an obligation to help veterans, to help all people adapt and overcome. But we have to adapt and overcome too, and how we address these issues. So I remember back to 2002 when I joined the military and was in basic training in the 4 years that I was on active duty. And the conversation about suicide was, don't kill yourself, you'll mess it up for everybody else. You're gonna create a lot of paperwork if you go kill yourself. These conversations didn't exist 20 years ago, and a lot's changed in these last 20 years. The fact that we're here together today, and folks are joining us online, is a testament to that. If you didn't know, today is International Survivors of Suicide Loss Day, and I stand here as one of those survivors of suicide loss. 6 years ago, my brother took his life, and that was a result of a long battle with depression, homelessness, drug addiction, a story that's all too common these days. Even 2016, when that happened, these conversations weren't as prevalent as they are today. So that gives me hope that we're moving in the right direction to get to zero. Zero suicides, zero people that don't have a safe place to lay their head at night. So the experts are going to tell you all the expert stuff, but I'm going to tee them up with good news, because I like good news. And we're heading into Thanksgiving and heading into Christmas and the holiday season. And if there are things worth celebrating, I can't think of two better things than this. So earlier this year, VA published their annual suicide data report, and the results are promising. So from 2020 to 2021, we saw the single biggest year decrease in veteran suicide. That 22 a day, that number that you see around, about 17 a day now. 17 too many? But that's 5 people that are alive today that weren't 10 years ago, that weren't 15 years ago. 5 times 365 is a lot. I'm not good at math, but that's a lot of people that are alive every year that wouldn't be otherwise. And so you're gonna hear from some of our suicide outreach folks today. They do amazing work, but they don't do it in a vacuum. They do it with the community, they do it with our federal partners, our state partners, our local partners. This is a whole of community, whole of government effort. So if that's not good enough news for you, we got some news about veteran homelessness as well. So about a month ago, VA and HUD, Housing and Urban Development, put out a joint press release for the 2022 point-in-time count data. And again, 2021 to 2022, a different year gap there, saw the biggest single year decrease in veteran homelessness. I think that's worth celebrating. Again, not just the efforts of VA, not just the efforts of HUD, but the efforts of the entire community and folks like you who are dedicating your time and resources to getting that number to zero. Now, we went from 17 a day 15 years ago to 22 a day, 22 today, to 17 a day, did that backwards, which is a big decrease. But the decrease in veteran homelessness is even more profound. So in 2010, when VA set a goal to end veteran homelessness, on any given night, there were about 70,000 veterans sleeping out on the street. And I didn't even realize this myself. I guess technically by the VA definition, I fit that category when I got off active duty. I didn't have a home for several months. I slept on people's couches. I slept wherever I could. And so I always think about this homelessness issue, not only for veterans, but for everyone. And I think, man, I am far more likely 1 or 2 bad decisions away from finding myself out on the street than I ever am from being 1 or 2 great decisions to become a billionaire or whatever. And I think all of us are kind of in that situation. Most people, when you talk to them, they'll say, I never thought I'd be here. I don't think anyone thinks they'll be there. But 70,000 in 2010, 33,000 tonight. That's about a 57% decrease. I think that's pretty incredible. Still, not zero, but that's 37,000 people tonight. 30 degrees, my watch says, that are sleeping somewhere hopefully a little closer to 70. So we got some work to do to get those additional 33 in housing. But adapting and overcoming, applying to them, as I said, it means we have to change how we tackle these problems. Meeting people where they're at, getting them into housing, getting them stability, getting them employment, treating their mental health issues, Those are all the things that my brother didn't have. My brother would find himself in a rehab facility. He'd be there for 2 or 3 weeks. He'd get clean, meaning he was clinically stable, back out. Never addressed all those things that most of us probably have. I don't know about you all, but I have bad days from time to time. I got a good network. I got a good job. I get to work with amazing people. I got coping skills, all those things that he didn't have. And a lot of the things that people that find themselves out on the streets for extended periods of time don't have, or people that end up taking their life don't have. And so meeting them where they're at and adapting and overcoming and how we address them means giving them the tools and resources so they can be successful. We talk a lot, we have this program called VA Voices at VA where folks come together and talk about their life story. And a lot of those life stories have a redemption arc to them. And a lot of our employees who are also veterans apply that redemption arc to their time at VA. I found something here. But what I find interesting is that we don't give anyone redemption. We don't give anyone salvation. We don't give anyone anything other than the tools for them to find redemption and salvation themselves so they can empower themselves, they can lift themselves up. So that's what our team of amazing professionals gets to do, and that's what the experts are going to talk to you about, because that ain't me. I'm not the expert. So I do want to give anyone listening one task. You got one assignment right now, and that's take out your phone. Sean, you probably don't need to do that. I know April and Sherry probably don't need to do this either, but take out your phone, Veteran Crisis Line 988. Put that in there. Now, you can use that number for a veteran, or you can use that number for anyone in crisis. Doesn't have to be a veteran. But if you dial that number and the person in crisis is a veteran, 988, press 1. That'll get you to the Veteran Crisis Line, where folks will answer your call 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, Christmas Eve, or a random cold morning in November. Our team here at Tennessee Valley has fielded over 2,500 calls this year alone. So that's 2,500 people in crisis that got attention and care that they needed immediately, hopefully saving their lives. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the experts here so they can speak. And first up, oh, you're doing this part. Okay. He's doing this part. Thank you. Appreciate you being here.
Let's give him a round of applause. Thank you very much. Great information, and we want to make sure that we understand that the VA Medical Center is all in as well in this community. I want to bring up our next speaker, Brandon Evans. Very briefly, I have a team of about 4 people. My outreach coordinator met with Brandon online for the last, I don't know how many months, and we're just excited that he was taking the lead to make this happen. So without further ado, Brandon Evans is a native of Henderson, North Carolina, served on active duty in the United States Marine Corps, hoorah, from 2011 to 2015. Brandon attended Vanderbilt University, where he earned his Master of Divinity from Vanderbilt Divinity School in 2021. Brandon, the floor is yours, sir.
Well, good morning, everyone. I am excited to be here, and I'm truly thankful for my Mount Zion church family for giving us the opportunity to address 2 very important issues to myself, my personal life, and both my professional life. Personally, just before I joined the Marine Corps in 2011, my first cousin died by suicide. And that really impacted me, and I had already signed my documents to join the Marine Corps that following year after I graduated high school, and I didn't really know how much his suicide affected me until I began to journey through life, and I joined the Marine Corps, and I saw how bad the suicide rates were in the Marine Corps, seeing friends die by suicide, seeing other fellow Marines die by suicide because they don't want to deploy. And so when I got out of the Marine Corps, I decided to make this a passion of mine and seeing what I can do in my community to address this issue that we face on an everyday basis. Secondly, homelessness is very, very important to me, is because when I got out of the Marine Corps in 2015, about 2 years later, I got a message on Facebook from my roommate who I spent about 2 years on Cherry Point, North Carolina. We were roommates. And he called me through the Facebook Messenger, if you all know what that is. I was like, who's calling me through Facebook Messenger, you know? But he called me and he said, Brandon, I don't know what's going on, you know, but I'm thinking about suicide, you know. I don't have anywhere to stay. My family has kicked me out. I've taken a drug that I don't know what it is. And he was right on the brink of homelessness. But not only homelessness, but both suicide and homelessness, who was my roommate for 2 years at Cherry Point in North Carolina. And so ever since then, I wanted to make sure that I was in a place, that I was in my community with boots on the ground, as we say in the Marine Corps, to make sure that I'm doing my part to address these two dire issues in our community. And so like Mr. Renfro said, we have the experts. I'm not one of the experts either, you know, but we do have some experts in the house today who will address these issues that we are facing in our community and hopefully give you some points that you can take away to put in your own communities because we all have our different audiences, right? And so whatever you take away from today, use that to give to your community and to your audience and to those who you're connected with to address both veteran suicide and homelessness and see if we can do a better issue in our communities with this at hand, okay? Well, thank you all for being here. This matters, and this means a lot as well because we all play a part in this. And again, thank you, Pastor Katina, who is our Associate Pastor of Congregational Care, and Mr. Conrad Washington. Hoorah? Hoorah. All right, thank you again.
Thank you, Brennan. We appreciate it. Appreciate a bright career ahead of them. Don't forget about the little people. So look, we're going to get into
experiencing those thoughts. So when I'm on the phone with a veteran that is experiencing suicidal ideation, I want to talk about what's keeping that veteran from following through. Here are some common risk factors and protective factors. You may find some of these a little surprising. If a person has a prior suicide attempt, that is considered a risk factor. Mental health issues and substance use issues, access to lethal means, which in working with the veterans, a lot of them have access to lethal means, firearms. Legal or financial challenges, we see that a lot after people get out of the military. Relationship issues, unemployment, and homelessness. Some of the reasons people choose not to follow through with suicide, protective factors, is they have access to care, which is huge. They have a place they can get help. A sense of connectedness with the community, with other veterans, with a church, with family, with coworkers. Problem-solving skills. A sense of spirituality, that there's something bigger than us. A mission or a purpose. All of us have to have a purpose to get up every morning. We have to have a mission. As human beings, we are created for a sense of purpose. Physical health plays a big part in mental health. And then social or emotional well-being.
Right, so now I am going to go over some of the data from the 2022 National Veteran Suicide Prevention Annual Report. And before hopping into that data, I would like to say that the annual report presents the most recent analysis of veteran suicide. The report includes veterans' mortality data from all 50 states and the District of Columbia. The report is based on national death certificate data currently available through 2020. The report defines veteran status as individuals who had activated federal military service for other than training and who were no longer serving in the U.S. military. So when we get to veteran suicide death from 2021 to 2020, we see in 2021, 6,001. We had a spike, the highest spike in 2018, 6,796, and then we dropped down in 2020 where we see that there were 343 fewer veterans that died from suicide in 2020 than 2019. When we look at the average number of suicides per day, as Mr. Renfro previously stated, in 2018, we had 18.9 veteran suicides per day. Currently in 2020, we are down to 16.8, or that 17 for veteran suicides per day. Of course, still too high. One is too many, but we are definitely making great strides in getting those numbers down. When we look at age and sex adjusted suicide rates with veterans and non-veteran U.S. adults for 2001 to 2020, we see that from 2019 to 2020, the veteran rates it fell by 4.8%. in comparison to our non-veteran U.S. adults that fell by 3.6%. However, we're still grateful that there was a decrease on both sides, veteran and non-veteran. When we look at our age groups, we see that from 2019 to 2020, suicide rates among individuals ages 18 and 34 increased, where we saw a decrease amongst other age groups. Looking at veterans by race, from 2019 to 2020, rates decreased for veterans in each racial category. In 2020, the suicide rate among white veterans was more than twice the rate among African American veterans. Now, looking at methods involved, you will see that in 2020, 71% of veteran suicide deaths utilize a firearm, which, in comparison to non veteran adults, was only 50%. There was also an increase for women for veterans to utilize firearm as their method of choice as well. So, what is lethal means safety? It is any action that builds in time and space between a suicidal impulse and the ability to harm oneself. So, that is basically anything that we can do to buy time to de escalate a crisis so that that person does not have those means within their reach to perform that suicide event. Effective lethal means safety education and counseling is collaborative and is veteran-centered. It respects the important role that firearms and medication may very well play in veterans' lives and be consistent within their values and priorities. When we look at suicidal crises, most of those crises from the time of decision to the actual action is less than an hour. So it shows that about 24% of attempters, it was less than 5 minutes, 71% within an hour. And when we look at the fatality rates of firearm injury, that was 85 to 90%, and the other 5% was other methods combined. So we know that lethal means safety does work. About 90% of people who survive a suicide attempt do not go on to die by suicide. If we collaborate with veterans ahead of time to help them survive in suicidal crises, we have likely prevented suicide for the rest of their lives. So again, suicide is preventable.
Thank you. I want to talk a little bit about myths and realities because there is some confusion as far as what's real and what has just been kind of, I don't want to say misrepresented on purpose, but accidentally, maybe people not understanding. So I'm going to ask y'all just to shout out what you think, myth or reality. People who talk about suicide are just seeking attention. Myth, yeah. No matter how casually or jokingly said, suicide threats should never be ignored and may indicate serious suicidal feelings. Sometimes that's how a person puts it out there to see how others will respond. So if someone who talks about suicide provides others with an opportunity to intervene, that is their way of starting the conversation. The only one who can really help someone who's suicidal is a mental health counselor or therapist. Myth, of course. So what we have found is that back in the day, they thought special training, and yes, there is a place for mental health, of course, mental health experts, but such special training is not required to safely raise the subject of suicide. Helping someone feel including, showing genuine, heartfelt support, listening can be a start. So a lot of times people will mention this to a friend prior to mentioning it to a professional. Sorry, we changed this last minute. So I want to talk about SAVE, and this is the training Validate the veteran's experience. I am not a veteran. I do not know what it's like to be in combat. I do not know what it's like to be in the military. I can still validate those difficult feelings they're experiencing, those feelings of loss, those feelings of not knowing they matter. So even if we don't necessarily understand what it's like to be in someone's shoes, it's very important that we validate what they are feeling. And then again, encourage treatment and expedite getting help. So one of the things I do at the VA is I do follow-up calls when someone has called the Veterans Crisis Line. And many times a loved one has called for the veteran, and eventually the veteran will get on the phone. So we have a lot of family members and friends that are calling the Veterans Crisis Line on behalf of the veteran, which is, again, it goes to show, and it's so important to know that it doesn't have to be a mental health professional that starts the help. Signs of suicidal thinking, if you remember, we talked about the risk factors. Hopelessness. Hopelessness is a big factor in suicide. Hopelessness is feeling that nothing's ever going to get any better. This is as good as it's going to get. When I am talking to someone on the Veterans Crisis Line, I am listening for signs of hopelessness. Anxiety, agitation, not sleeping, mood swings. Again, as I talked about in risk factors, not having a purpose, feeling like there's no reason to live, feeling like they don't contribute. Rage or anger. Engaging in risky activities without thinking. So there are a lot of suicidal behaviors that the person may not say are suicidal behaviors, but they're doing things that can end in death. Increase in alcohol or drug use, and withdrawing from family and friends. And these are all things I ask when I'm on the Veterans Crisis Line with someone. Tell me about your friends. Tell me about who you spend time with. More signs of suicidal thinking is thinking about hurting. This is when you want to get immediate attention. You don't want to leave the person alone. You want to call the Veterans Crisis Line with them. You want to go to the ER with them. If they talk about thinking about a plan, hurting or killing themselves, looking for ways to die, trying to get the means, talking about death, dying, or suicide. I also hear people talk about their funeral. They're healthy, but they talk about wanting to plan their funeral. Self-destructive or risk-taking behaviors, especially when it involves alcohol, drugs, weapons, driving very recklessly at a high rate of speed without a seatbelt. And asking the question. Again, to me, this is one of the most important parts of the presentation. It's all very important, but knowing how to ask the question. Kind of jumped ahead of myself. I am very passionate about working with people with suicidal thoughts, but it's really important that we use these words. Are you thinking about killing yourself? And I understand it can be uncomfortable, but it's really important we're able to say the words so the person has what I call permission to talk about it. Do ask the questions if you've identified warning signs. Do ask the question in a natural way that flows with the conversation. Hey, I've noticed you've been really down lately. You're not going hunting or fishing anymore with us. You've missed work a lot. Start the conversation. Again, don't ask the question as if you're looking for a no. Sure, you want to hear the answer no, but we need to make sure we're not pulling that no from them when it may be a yes. And don't wait to ask the question when someone is halfway out the door. So if a person says, I have to be at work at 3, and you're with them at 2, and at 2:55 you decide to ask, make sure if you ask the question, there's enough time to help with intervention if needed.
Okay, so when we get into talking with a veteran at risk for suicide, it's important that you remain calm, listen more than you speak, so that you are able to get all of the information needed to make the best assessment. Maintain eye contact. Act with confidence, no matter how nervous you may be. Working in the ED in Nashville for 9.5 years, actually being the first person to respond to those crisis calls, being the one having to contact VA police, local police to initiate welfare checks, being that individual in the ED having to talk face to face with that veteran or that family member, it can make you very nervous no matter how much experience or education you have in doing that. So just trying your best to keep it together so that you are able to help de-escalate the veteran. Do not argue. Use open body language. Limit your questions, but make sure you are asking open-ended questions to keep the veteran talking. Use supportive and encouraging comments. Again, as Sherry stated, I am not a veteran. However, my father is a Vietnam veteran. I have many service members and veterans in my family. And so although I cannot relate to being a veteran, I know how I would want someone to treat my father and my family members and friends that are coming to any type of VA facility or facility in general seeking help. And lastly, be honest. I like to tell people I know a lot, but I don't know everything, and it's okay not to know everything. That's why we have teams. Everybody has their own unique gifts and their different levels of expertise. So definitely working with your team on things that you do not know, and definitely not making any promises to any veterans and service members when providing services that you cannot guarantee will be delivered. So when we get to be validating the veteran's experience, talk openly about suicide, being willing to listen to them and allow them to express their feelings. That is not downplaying what they may have going on that is considered a crisis to them. We all consider different things to be crises. What's a crisis to me may not be a crisis to you, but that does not mean that we still cannot respect another person's thoughts and feelings towards their situation. Recognize that the situation is serious to them. Do not pass any judgment, and reassure the veteran that help is available, even if you are not the one to provide the direct care. When we encourage treatment and expedite getting help, what you should do if someone is suicidal is do not keep it a secret. Do not leave him or her alone, and try to get the person to seek immediate help from their primary care or doctor or their nearest emergency room. If that is not available at that time, then the best thing to do is to call 911 and reassure the veteran that help is on the way, and also 988 is available. Some examples of other services that are available when encouraging treatment and expediting help. Of course, the 911, 988, and press 1. We've also provided some different mental health agencies that are in the area, starting, of course, with the Nashville and Murfreesboro VA Medical Center and Urgent Care. We have Mental Health Cooperative Crisis Treatment Center that provides 24/7. They are usually who we contact when we are reaching out for mobile crisis. We also have mental health crisis walk-in centers that are also open 24/7 for individuals who desire to meet with a crisis specialist in person. Moving on, volunteer behavioral health, Pathways, Alliance Healthcare Services, and McNabb Center. And I know I'm kind of going through these, so this information will also be available via PowerPoint. If anyone needs it sent to their email address, we can get that set up for you. And additionally, volunteer behavioral health and frontier health.
So just to wrap up, I want to, we talked about all the resources, but remember, you are also a resource. When you are with that person and you have concern and you start talking to them, You are the resource, and you do not have to be a mental health expert. What people need is to know that you're genuine, you care, you're listening. You can get them the resources, you can go to them with the resources. It's not all on you when you ask these questions, but in that moment when you're with that person, you are that person's biggest resource. So to wrap up, I just want to go over SAVE again, just to remember that you are looking for signs of suicidal thinking, hopelessness, making jokes or offhanded remarks about suicide, giving things away, talking about not having a reason, talking about not mattering, asking the most important question of all, validating the veteran's experience. You may not understand it, and as Dr. Stewart said, what might be a crisis for me may not be for Dr. Stewart, but we still validate that person is experiencing those feelings, and encourage treatment and expedite getting help. So I know, just quickly, working with the VCL, we have, unfortunately, we have so many calls that we have to divide it between 3 people. And I know when I get my list of people that I will be calling, I don't consider that a random assignment. I am put in these people's lives today to call, to maybe say that thing that they need to hear, to give them protective factors, to let them know I care. So it is not a screen full of names for me. I start each day with a prayer that God will put the right words in my mouth, because sometimes I don't think I can do it by myself. I think it's a God thing. And so I take very seriously who is on my computer screen and who I will be calling that day. So again, just remember that you are the most important resource in that moment.
And quickly, we also have some additional resources that are provided through the VA as far as some of the apps. So I know there's a couple of slides, so if you can just briefly just go through the slides, and I'll just kind of touch base on a couple of them. So we're definitely familiar with dialing 988, pressing 1. I'm kind of stand back here so I can see. And so this is just giving an overview of how many calls are coming through 988 in the crisis line. Up to date, 5.9 million calls, 7,004 chats, and over 1.1 million referrals. Okay, and so we can keep going through these slides. These are just basically, Ms. Winfrey already had us do this earlier today by saving 988 in our phone, so it's easy accessible. We can keep the next slide, please. Yes. And so Make the Connection. This is a great resource for veterans and service members where they are actually able to get online and hear personal stories from their fellow veterans and service members. So that definitely helps so they can have that place of community. Going back to lethal means safety and the importance of storing your firearms. And for outreach today, we do have gun locks available for you all to take, so grab as many as you would like. And then this is a couple of very helpful mobile apps that veterans and service members are able to have this very important information right at their fingertips by just downloading it to their phone, and all apps are free.
Those are on the table, so take lots. We brought lots of information.
And so we have Coaching into Care, because you cannot forget the family and the supporters that are helping our veterans and service members transition back into the community. So Coaching for Care is an amazing tool to provide care for our caregivers. And then last but not least, there is also a video version of the VA SAVE training that's available through Psych Armor. And they also provide other amazing online, very brief trainings that if you ever have an interest in any type of topic relating to veterans, suicide prevention, or any other type of helpful treatment skill, then you can just search via Psych Armor and work at your own pace. And so that concludes our presentation for VA SAVE. We're not done yet.
We're not done yet.
Let's give these ladies a round of applause.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, that was a great presentation. So for those folks online, you need to know a few things. We're going to make these slides available to everyone if they want them, to make sure you have that information. The next thing, are there any questions in the audience right now? I'll be right there. I'm running to you with the microphone. Oh, actually, thank you, Brandon. Give him 1 second to turn it on, man. We have people online. Thank you.
Is that good? Yeah, I was going to say Brandon could actually do this. This is just a reminder that at both VA campuses here in Nashville and Murfreesboro, we have chaplains on call 24/7. We would love always to partner so we can come into the ED. We also take consults from the crisis line, and we have a dedicated chaplain who is doing suicide prevention calls. We want to be part of the care, and we want to be part of the solution, resolution, reconciliation.
A very integral part of the care.
Absolutely.
Very integral.
And Brandon can be called upon.
Any other questions? I have a question for you ladies. I always ask this question. As this office travels around the nation and partners with faith-based and community organizations, what can this particular organization do, this church, people of God do in their community to help suicide? What can they do, from the clergy down to the deacons, down to different boards? What can they do?
I'll go first and then let Dr. Stewart answer. So do things like this, first of all, and it doesn't matter if 500 people are online or 3, as long as the right person hears it. And again, the second thing is being willing to show up and ask those hard questions despite your discomfort.
And so I would say starting with identifying your veterans and service members within the congregation. Whether that be, when we have those veteran days and those different types of days of appreciation, having them to stand up, getting their contact information, and then as Sherry stated, setting up events that are very helpful to them that they are needing while transitioning back into the community or just being here. And also, I would say, for example, we have veteran coffee socials. So thus far, we've rolled out 3, and that has been a great way for our churches and communities to be able to identify veterans when they see, hey, this is an opportunity for me to get out and socialize with my fellow comrades.
And as Dr. Stewart said, to piggyback on what she said quickly, we got to remember that when these veterans are in the military and they're in combat, don't be vulnerable, don't show vulnerability, stoicism. And then when they come back, it's like, ask for help, tell me all about it. That is a culture shock. So as Dr. Stewart said, you identify in them instead of thinking they will come to you. Because it is very hard to transition from no vulnerability to, okay, now you can tell your story and we can, that's a hard transition for veterans.
Yeah, it really is. I can attest to that, but thank God for his grace. Listen, let's give these ladies a hand. I'm sorry, we have one more. No, we have one more question. We don't want to.
I want to add one point to that.
Absolutely.
So I think one thing that everyone can do, regardless of your position or where you're at, is creating the space to actually have these conversations, because the idea that someone sleeping out on the streets at night is there for a moral failing or because they're weak or whatever, we got to move past that. Same with people that are having thoughts of suicide. So speaking up is not weak, asking for help is not weak, and having those conversations constantly. You can't say it once. If you want to change someone, you got to say it hundreds of times, right? So continuing to have those conversations, continuing to make those points so people will feel safe to speak up, incredibly important.
Great comment, thank you. You had a question, ma'am? Please.
My question is, what do you do for the veterans that are considered humanitarian and have no insurance to go to places like Mental Health Co-op or Centerstone or the other community mental health agencies?
So first of all, there is something called Behavioral Health Safety Net, and it covers psychiatrist appointments, case management, therapy, anything a person needs on an outpatient basis. So what I do when a person doesn't qualify for services at the VA and they can't afford mental health treatment, I will actually call mental health co-op, volunteer, and help do a warm handoff so that they can apply for behavioral health safety net, and all of those services are paid for. I never leave a VCL, Veterans Crisis Line call, acronym, sorry, and say, I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do. We will find something. So yeah, there's a lot of community resources out there.
And although it's not a overnight fix either, if it's a situation of them not having health care or being able to receive services because they just have not filed a claim maybe, then that is when we will connect them with our transition care advocate, and they can walk them through that process of what they are eligible for, how to complete that claim, how to submit it, so that we can get them service connected to ensure that if they are not even receiving services within the VA, maybe through community care, partnering them with a community provider.
We have found ways to get people treatment. Good question.
Yeah, and I'm going to add to that. If someone's in crisis and they show up to the VA, they're not going to get turned away. So if they're in crisis, bring them to the ED, bring them to the urgent care center down in Murfreesboro. And we'll see them and then sort the details out after.
There you go. Thank you. And someone told me just to say borough is easy. Pastor, Associate Pastor, you had something, ma'am?
Yes, I had a question as well. First, I have to just tell you, thank you so much for giving us this wealth of information. I do believe that it has equipped a lot of us here in the audience with some tools that we can use in case we run into situations like this. One of the questions that I did have, though, if none of us have ever dialed 988, what can be expected on the other side of dialing that number? And then two, you guys listed some crisis centers and resources. Where can that information be found if we or someone that we know needs those resources?
So when you call 988, you will get a licensed mental health professional. Dr. Stewart and I are both licensed. They will ask what's going on, get information, kind of triage the call. Does the person need resources for outpatient? Do they think they need to be transported to the emergency room right away? So they triage the call, they offer empathic listening, reflective listening, and from there, decide with the veteran, sometime, what is best for the veteran. If a person is, I will be honest, if a person is suicidal with intent and means, we do a welfare check. Law enforcement is called out to ensure safety. And when you call 988, they have a wealth of resources. So they can give you information on different crisis centers in the area. And VCL, Veterans Crisis Line 988, they have a wealth of resources. They give a lot of resources on every call. Does that help answer the question?
Yes, it does. And I thank you for that answer. I just felt like it was important for us to know, what can be expected on the other side of that call, especially if any of us ran into someone who was suicidal at that time. Can we, will we have what we need to be provided to the people on the other end to answer those questions? So just those kinds of things. I just want people to be able to walk away with that information too.
Yes, and they will ask for demographic information, but if you don't have an address, that's not they will work with what you can provide them. They do ask for a lot of demographic information and things like that, but they will work with whatever information you can give them.
Awesome. Let's give these ladies a hand again. Thank you very much. All right, so a couple of things I missed. I always miss some things. We've been on the road, as I mentioned. Outside, there are tables. You heard the ladies tell you that. There are gun locks. There are a lot of goodies out there, some pens and some other things for you. But also, we have the mobile vet unit outside as well, which is managed by a person. He has a table out there as well. So please stop by the mobile vet unit. It's outside. It's an RV. You can't miss it. It's white with the VA logo there. Please stop by as well. So we're going to move on to our last speaker, and certainly not our least speaker. Hold on to your seats. Dynamic speaker here. And it's Sean Liu. He's the Director of Communications, Homeless Program Office, VHA, Department of Veteran Affairs, right? He's responsible for developing strategic communications that enhance efforts to prevent and end homelessness among veterans and their families, right? He previously worked in the VA, including supporting the integration of VA homeless programs into the department. Sean holds a Bachelor's of Arts in Psychology from Florida International University, a Master of Science Social Work degree from Florida State University, is a licensed clinical social worker with the state of Florida. Hold on to your seats. Sean Liu. Come get him, Sean.
Thank you, Mr. Washington. Good morning. Now, come on, we're in church. Good morning. There we go. As Mr. Washington mentioned, I'm really excited to be here. My name is Sean Liu. A couple disclaimers right at the gate. I was born and raised in Miami, which means a couple different things. I talk fast, I'm loud, and I'm gonna talk with my hands a lot. But I'm gonna summon all my strength today to say nice and slow things because I think this information is really, really important to convey. Similar to the SAVE training that we just saw moments ago, I want to share some really, really important information to how you can help join us in our efforts to end veteran homelessness. Let's go on to the next slides because I've got a lot of stuff to go over today. First, I want to just provide a little bit of a high level of what we're going on. This is the agenda for my talk in the next 45 minutes or so. I'm gonna open us up with some nouns and verbs. Actually, go back. This one right here, the agenda slide, one back. There we go, perfect. So I'm going to start you off with some introductory concepts, some nouns and adjectives, just so that we're on the same level, we're on the same page of what we mean when we say veteran homelessness, homeless veteran, et cetera, et cetera. Then I'm going to provide a little bit of an update on our progress toward ending veteran homelessness. As Mr. Renfro mentioned earlier, we're making great progress, but we still have more work to do. I'm going to talk to you about an initiative that's been going on this year. Our goal to generate 38,000 permanent housing placements for veterans. It's been a major focus of our effort during the calendar year of 2022. We're almost done because we're approaching December, and so I want to give you a status update there. Then the real meat and potatoes of my talk, the actual programs and services that we at VA have to prevent veteran homelessness and end it for individual veterans experiencing homelessness. Going to talk about how you can join us in this effort, some ways in which, if you're interested after my talk, to stay engaged and connected, and of course, some Q&A at the end. All right, let's go on to the next slide. Some introductory concepts to actually level set with us. Let's do one more slide. I want to stay right here. So let's unpack this for a second. What do we mean when we say homeless veteran? All right, so we're going to break this down. First off, we're going to talk about the adjective, homeless, all right? This text here is actually drawn from something called the McKinney-Vento Act. It's one of the first pieces of legislation that actually created federal programs to address homelessness, and it defines it thusly. A person experiencing homelessness is somebody who lacks a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence, and generally speaking, this takes on two forms. You have what we call sheltered homelessness, where it's people living in places such as emergency shelters, oftentimes, especially before the pandemic, big buildings where you had a bunch of people, bunk beds, barracks style, transitional housing programs as well, and something that we call safe havens, which are specialized versions, particularly for those folks with severe mental illness who are struggling with their recovery, but still need a place to stay today that is responsive to maybe if they have a manic disorder, a psychotic disorder, they're seeing or hearing things that aren't there, right? Specific places that provide them with shelter tonight and are responsive and caring in a particular way that will help them. Also, the second kind of form of homelessness is what we call unsheltered homelessness. Now, this is public or private places not ordinarily designated or used as living habitation. So think literally on the streets, literally in the woods, in encampments, under bridges, et cetera, et cetera. Now, Mr. Renfro mentioned something earlier about his own experience that you're probably noticing isn't quite captured here and doesn't quite speak to the lived experience of, say, also women veterans or veterans' households with minor dependents, and that's the couch surfing or doubled up. It is very much still homeless, but it has some very frustrating implications for the ability to access services. But I want to mention it there because it's a very real experience for many people, but also can be a little bit challenging when it comes to actually getting help, not only from VA or from other service providers, because of this particular definition. All right, that's the adjective homeless. Let's talk about veteran now. So this definition of veteran, you're probably noticing as you're reading through, is way broad, super broad, broader than the definition of veteran for the purposes of, say, VA healthcare eligibility, right? For the purposes of ending veteran homelessness, veterans are defined as adults who've served in the armed forces in active duty, especially those who've been called up to active duty if you were in the reserves or the National Guard. And this is going to be regardless of duty time and regardless of discharge status. And you're probably wondering, Sean, wait a minute, but a lot of those veterans aren't necessarily eligible for many of the services that VA has, and you'd be absolutely correct. But what this tells us is that military service is military service. And when it comes to ending veteran homelessness, even if certain veterans aren't eligible for the programs and services that I'm gonna talk about today, as communities, as a country, we still have to find solutions. Homelessness is solvable. And what you're gonna hear in a little bit, and what I think we talked about with the suicide prevention, right? Is that oftentimes we think of homelessness as a series of individual personal failures. And that it's been like this problem that has been plaguing our country for years. What we know, though, from history and from the research is that, number one, the state of homelessness that we see today is actually a relatively recent development, maybe in the last 40 years or so. But also, and we're gonna see this in the next few slides, is that the cause of homelessness is this mix of different factors, and we have to pay attention to the system level and structural factors as well. It's very easy to say it's actually just a personal failing. But in the next few slides, we're gonna talk about what that means. But again, for our purposes here, the definition of veteran is very broad, intentionally broad. Military service is military service. All right, I wanna talk now about those risk factors because you're probably wondering, okay, Sean, you just said homelessness is solvable, cool. I'm gonna tentatively believe you right now. And you just said it's not about personal failings, it's about structural factors. Cool, what on earth do you mean by that? Great question. So, what you're seeing here is based off of research. This was actually a study that was done in 2015. And it took a look at the different risk factors that predicted why veterans specifically became homeless. And what they identified were, yes, individual level factors, but also system level factors. And I'm gonna unpack this a little bit. The individual factors are ones that you probably thought of already and are a little bit intuitive for you when you think, homelessness, right? Substance use disorders, lack of stable housing or employment, history of incarceration, lack of social support, and adverse childhood events. So we're not saying that certain individual factors won't increase your chances of becoming homeless. That's absolutely true. But that's not alone the sole explanation. It's not sufficient. We also have to look at the system level factors, our community factors that also play in, that actually provide kind of like the unfortunate framework for these individual factors to take hold. You know many folks probably in your lives right now, or who you've worked with if you're a clinician, who have substance use disorders, but they're not homeless. Or they don't have a job, but they're not homeless. Or they've been through the foster care system, but they're not homeless, right? We know that. So what's going on? And I would argue that it's these system level factors that are really, really taking root. What do we mean by that? Lack of affordable housing in our communities, right? You know as well as I do, the rent's going up. Rent's high. Rent's too damn high, right? I know we're in church, I'm not gonna swear, but right? Rent's too high. Lack of economic opportunities, right? So meaningful jobs that pay livable wages. Neighborhood factors, cultural factors, right? All of these system level things are true. Homelessness is solvable, but it's not a failure of people, it's a failure of systems, which means in addition to fixing individuals, we also have to fix our communities as well. Yeah, thank you. Next slide, please. All right, I'm gonna dive into this a little bit more, and I wanna talk about the more risk factors. This is actually from an earlier study back in 2013. All of this admittedly is the before time and before the pandemic, but I still think the research holds up. This took a look at about 100,000 veterans, their service history from actually accessing care through VA. And what they were able to do was essentially identify 4 risk factor profiles. Now, that's not to say that if you don't fit these profiles, you won't experience homelessness. We're not saying that at all. But when we looked at that 100,000, this is how it all bore out. Number 1, the first risk factor profile was relatively few problems. Now, right out of the gate, we're like, what are you talking about, Sean? Relatively few problems? But again, right, and when we think about neighborhood factors, structural factors, lack of affordable housing, this is what's going on here. One of the things, I do a lot of stuff with VA in addition to comms. For many years, I've led our suicide prevention integration work. I've led our racial equity work really recently. What we learned from race equity is that, especially for black veterans make up about 12% of all veterans. They make up about 33% of veterans experiencing homelessness. A big part of what we think is going on, and I would argue it's this relatively few problems, is a term, I don't know if you've ever heard of this term, network impoverishment. You're nodding your head, a couple of you heard it. What is network impoverishment if you haven't heard of it before? Okay, let me give you an example. If VA decides that I've been mouthing off too much today, and you're like, Sean, you gotta go, and I lose my job, I am not gonna be homeless. Why? My dad is pretty well off, I'm gonna go live with him. He gets mad at me, my mom's pretty well off, I'm gonna live with her. She gets mad at me, my brother and sister, they do all right, I'm gonna live with them. They get mad at me, I'm gonna go live with some, it will be several years, maybe a decade before I burn out every bit of my network. And my network's pretty middle class. I'm gonna be fine, probably until I can get my act together and get a job. Why? Not because of me, but because my network has resources. My network has slack in their systems to float me for a little bit. And a lot of what we see especially with black veterans who enter into homelessness with relatively few problems, they're not coming with major substance use disorders or physical disabilities. But it's that their systems, their communities are pushed to the limits as well. They don't have the slack to support. That's a really, really big issue. That's not a personal failing. That's a structural issue. So relatively few problems. Number 2, again, now we're getting into the more intuitive, those kind of make sense. For those who are clinically minded, number 2 is basically comorbidity. So the presence of a substance use disorder and a mental health condition. Number 3 gets into something that's really, really important as well, especially for those who have a passion for justice-involved veterans or criminal justice reform. Substance use disorder, incarceration history, and poverty. You saw a couple times now incarceration history showing up in 2 slides. So history of incarceration is a huge risk factor for homelessness. And last, of course, is a disabling medical condition, which can dovetail into the whole underemployment, unemployment, lack of good income as well, right? Again, not saying that if you don't fall into these risk factors, you'll never be homeless. But this is oftentimes what we see, how it bears out. Let's go on to the next slide, please. I want to talk about the progress. Now, Mr. Renfro gave us our big major top line. Significant progress has been made towards ending veteran homelessness. Let's go on to one more slide. This chart here doesn't tell the full story. This is a little bit out of date, but what this chart shows is that since 2010, we've seen at least a 50% reduction in veteran homelessness. What actually Mr. Renfro revealed was when we turned these slides in, we actually had some breaking news. This chart is even better. There's been even more progress. So what you're seeing, actually I'll kind of point it out there. There's this gap in 2021, right? What do you think that gap is? That's the pandemic right there. Right? So when you think about, so this actually chart, let me actually orient you to what's going on here. This chart is taken from our partners at the Department of Housing and Urban Development. It's something called their point-in-time count data. What the point-in-time count is, basically like homeless census. Every year in January, on the coldest night of the year, usually around the 3rd week of January, we all go out and we try to count as many people experiencing as homelessness as possible to get a snapshot, right, of what homelessness looks like the same time of the year each year. And what you've seen in 2010, where we had a high of about 74,000 veterans, to 2020, which was the last full pit count right before the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw it drop down to around 37,232. Pandemic hit, 2021, we actually couldn't do an unsheltered count because it wasn't safe. So that's why there's this gap in our data. But what I can tell you is that the new version of this slide for 2022 data, we see an actual big dip in that bright red line. The new number is 37,090 something or another, right? As Mr. Renfro mentioned, that's an 11% decline from the last stat of 37,232. 11% decline. From 2010, as Mr. Renfro mentioned, 55% reduction in veteran homelessness. This is some of the most significant progress for any subpopulation in America in homelessness. And actually, I'm not quite calling HUD out, but other subpopulations are having their numbers go up, while veteran homelessness has been continuing to drop. This is really important. But 49.7%, 55% is not 100%. So the mission continues. We still have more work to do. But hope, gonna remain vigilant. Let's go on to the next slide, please. All right, I use this term so often. I mean, just spoilers, I even have a podcast that I host. It's called Ending Veteran Homelessness. It's almost like a tick how often I say ending veteran homelessness. So it'll probably be helpful for me to kind of define, Sean, what do you mean when you say ending veteran homelessness? Great question. What we don't mean is that no veteran will experience a housing crisis ever again, right? That's not the world that we're living in. And let's game this out a little bit. Let's say I waved my magic wand. I don't have a magic wand. But let's say I waved my magic wand. I housed every veteran across the country. Every single veteran experiencing homelessness today, I house them. Yay, right? We did it, everybody. Ticker tape parade, press conference, all the satellite media tours, all the celebrations, right? What happens tomorrow? What happens the day after that? And the day after that? And you're nodding your head because you're like, yeah, Sean, another veteran will fall into homelessness tomorrow, and you'd be 1,000% correct. So what we're not saying is that no veteran will experience a housing crisis again. What we are saying when we say ending veteran homelessness is that our communities, our systems will be robust to accomplish two major things. Number one, it'll prevent homelessness whenever possible. It just doesn't happen anymore, right? We prevent it whenever possible. But number two, in those unfortunate events where it does happen, it would be rare, brief, and non-reoccurring. It doesn't happen to that many veterans. It'll be for a short time in that veteran's life, and hopefully one time in that veteran's life. Now, when I've been in homelessness for basically all of my professional career, as Mr. Conrad mentioned, I am a social worker, and when I started at a small transitional housing program in Tallahassee, Florida, the kind of the going mantra was like, oh, we're working ourselves out of a job, right? Like, we're gonna end homelessness, we're working ourselves out of a job. Soon, I'm gonna talk about the communities that have actually done this. What we have learned from them is that achieving an effective end to veteran homelessness is only the beginning. That sustaining the progress, keeping the work going, making sure our systems are still as resilient and robust so that we prevent it whenever possible and it's otherwise rare, brief, and non-recurring. That's just as hard, if not harder, to do than achieving the milestones. So we still have work to do. Our systems may look a little bit differently, but the mission will continue. Let's go on to the next slide, please. This is not pie-in-the-sky stuff, people. 83 communities, including 3 whole states, Virginia, Connecticut, and Delaware, including one of your sister cities, Chattanooga, have achieved an effective end to veteran homelessness. This is fantastic. Now, we've operationalized this as well, and you can actually Google something called the criteria and benchmarks to achieve an effective end to veteran homelessness. That sounds like a government thing, right? Because it's so long and unwieldy, but it actually operationalizes what all this means. And it's really about communities that do several things. Do you know every veteran experiencing homelessness by name? Not just estimate, not just guess. Do you know them by name? Can you give them shelter? Can you house them in a speedy time? Generally speaking, are you housing more veterans than who become homeless? And can you back all of this up with data? That's what all the 83 communities in 3 states did. But what you can also see here, so this map here actually has the different communities that have achieved this. Dark blue stars. The whole country isn't a dark blue star yet. So we still have more work to do. The mission continues. Let's go on to the next slide, please. All right, I want to talk to you about something that's been a major initiative this year. We're almost done. It's our permanent housing placement challenge, our 38,000 goal. Let's go on one more slide. So what I'm going to do is kind of set the stage as to why we needed to do this particular goal. Now, you just heard me say, when a community achieves an effective end to veteran homelessness, generally speaking, what that means, or one of the core components, is that you're able to house more veterans that then fall into homelessness, right? So you have this net reduction. I'm gonna unpack this one a little bit. So we brought back to this slide. So you see here, from 2010 to 2016, right, where this area is encircled, that represents about a 47% reduction in veteran homelessness. A lot of great progress, a lot of where we were housing more veterans than who became homeless. Let's go on to one more slide, please. But what you can see here for this next section, still a reduction, right? It's about a 6% reduction, but flat, a little bit plateau, maybe a little bit of a stall, and a couple years where there was like an uptick. A couple times it went up. That stall is very frustrating. What that means is that we're basically keeping pace. We're only housing about the same number of veterans who fall into homelessness. And that stall is absurdly frustrating, especially for all of us who have this deep commitment to ending veteran homelessness. So let's go one more slide. That's why earlier this year, VA Secretary Dennis McDonough announced a major goal for us for the homeless programs, that we would generate and achieve 38,000 permanent housing placements for veterans. That's the core kind of like metric or a major bit of currency in terms of outcomes. Permanent housing placements. How many keys can we give to veterans so that they can move into apartments? 38,000 of those. To put that into context, 38,000 is about that last little data point that you saw, the number of veterans counted in the 2020 point in time count. But sports fans, I'm told that it's also about the same number of seats at Fenway Park. I'm a nerd, so that doesn't resonate with me, but I'm told that it resonates with sports fans. So imagine, right? Close your eyes and imagine, like an entire stadium filled with veterans who are formerly homeless, but are now housed out of the cold because of our community work. That's a really, really important stuff. The good news is it was a big, audacious goal. We were freaking out at the beginning. There's like, oh my gosh, Mr. Secretary, how are we gonna do this? But we're actually making great progress since September, and actually I even have October data, which actually just came out, I don't know, yesterday before I flew in. We've actually achieved closer to 34,000 permanent housing placements at about 90% of the goal. So I think we're actually gonna hit it early, which is fantastic. Very, very important stuff. We can talk a little bit about the programs and services that contribute to that, but this is really a testament to a lot of different things. Number one, the dedicated staff across the country who are doing this hard work, right? They're exhausted, they're tired, but they're still doing it, they're still repping for veterans on a day-to-day. But it also depends on community partners like you, who are actually helping us connect veterans in your communities to our services, to landlords who will rent to our veterans, to business owners who hire our veterans to ensure housing stability. This is a community-wide effort, and it's fantastic. Let's go on to the next slide, please. All right, the meat and potatoes here, the actual resources that we have. Now, a couple bits of disclaimers here. We're gonna go over a lot of stuff, and I'm actually not gonna go too deep into, we can go into one more, yeah, we can stay here. I'm not gonna get into the whole details about eligibility, whatever, because I don't want you to be experts. I don't want you to have to be experts. There's so many programs and they're so technical. I just want you to know that these programs exist, that they're available, and that there's hope to be had when you encounter veterans experiencing homelessness or housing instability. One of the key bits that I want to let you know, though, just to kind of set this up, is that at VA, we actually have a wide array of services that cover a really broad range of the housing instability to homelessness experience. We actually do have what we call prevention resources that work with veterans who are either in their own places today, or maybe even those who are doubled up right now, to prevent them from falling into what we call unsheltered homelessness or sheltered homelessness, so prevention resources. We also have resources for veterans that will provide beds right tonight. If they need a warm place to get out of the cold, to get out of the rain. I'm from Florida, so it's hurricanes and rains. But we have temporary living spaces as well. We have permanent housing resources that get veterans connected to fair market value apartments in their community. And we even have, as I mentioned before, because of the really, really important component that passed criminal justice engagement, past history of incarceration has to increasing risk of homelessness. We have actual outreach workers who go into prisons, jails, and into courts to provide services and get veterans connected to VA resources as well. A broad range to cover this entire timeline. Let's go one more slide, please. Do not read all this. Do not read all this that is coming up. This is what I call the alphabet soup slide, right? All of the programs and services, it's the VA government speak. So I don't want you to be an expert in like all these different labels and all that stuff like that. What I want you to take away is that when you think about all of the programs that VA offers, you can kind of lump them into 4 main buckets, and it's the buckets that I want you to be aware of. So first and foremost, outreach, engagement, assessment, and referral. That bucket there is really about the front door. Probably wondering, Sean, well, all right, all these programs and services are great, all this progress is great. How do veterans get connected to you? This is how. So a couple different ways. We have staff who will literally go out into shelters, out into the community to talk with veterans experiencing homelessness right now. We have one-stop shops where veterans can walk in and select places throughout the country. But also really importantly, just for everybody, we have the National Call Center for Homeless Veterans. Later in my talk, I'm gonna actually give you the number. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, similar to the crisis line, can talk to veterans right now and help get them connected to us. And I mentioned just recently the Veterans Justice Programs that works with veterans in jails, prisons, and courts. We have our residential services that will provide temporary beds for veterans to get them out of the cold as they're going through their housing journey. Those permanent housing resources, now the permanent housing resources are important because what they do is twofold. Number one, they provide either short-term or long-term rental subsidies. Remember we talked about rent is too high. A lot of people can't afford rent. These programs make the rent affordable by providing subsidies. They're actually doing some cost sharing, helping to pay the landlord so that at whatever, usually around 30% of the veteran's income, that's all they pay. And then the wraparound services like case management, counseling, primary care, substance treatment, employment search, right? So that when we get them housed, they stay housed. And last is our specialty services. I just mentioned about employment as well, but there's one really neat one that I want to highlight. This is the only acronym that I'm going to say, the HPACT, or Homeless Patient Aligned Care Teams. We talked about system-level factors and system-level changes. HPACT is just this really, really great example of the system changing itself to be responsive to unique barriers of the subpopulation. This is primary care that is specifically primary care doctors, general practitioners, specifically tailored to people experiencing homelessness. So they have low panel sizes. They don't have to work with a whole lot of patients so that they can focus. They have open appointment times, walk-in appointment times, because when you're homeless on the street, oftentimes you don't have a watch. You don't have a calendar, right? So actually making appointments can be difficult. And then other embedded staff like peer support specialists and social workers to actually provide services and get them connected to those housing resources as we're taking care of their healthcare needs as well. Really, really important stuff. Again, I don't want you to be an expert about this. I just want you to know that these exist. Next slide, please. As I start winding down my talk, and plenty of time for Q&A, I want to just share some opportunities how you can help us in this collective mission, right? How you can be a part of this journey with us. Number one, when you engage and meet with veterans experiencing homelessness, maybe you're volunteering at a shelter. Maybe you've opened your doors to this church and it's a cold night shelter. Maybe you're running into a veteran who is in the downtown area or under an overpass and maybe flying a sign, right? Number one, be patient. They may not have had their basic needs met. What do I mean by that? Let me game this out. I'm kind of a man-child when I don't eat. I get hangry, I get irritable, I get grumpy, right? And that's just if I am a half hour late from lunch, right? Imagine how absurdly just obnoxious I would be if I haven't eaten all morning or all day or in several days. I'm pretty worthless if I haven't gotten at least 7 hours of sleep. Kind of a man baby with that as well. Imagine how worthless I would be if I was, a day without good sleep, 2 days, a week, a month, right? Now, turn all of that to 20 to 30 on 40 on your dial. That's probably what the people you're engaging with out in the community are like, so be patient. Number two, if you're gonna start helping them get connected to us, and we encourage you to do so, keep in the back of your head, they may not have a reliable means to like stay in touch with us, right? We've been doing a pretty decent job of getting smartphones and cell phones into the hands of literally homeless veterans, but we've still got more to distribute, which means the veteran you're talking to may not have a phone. They probably don't have a mailing address. So you want to talk through a little bit of like, where are you normally? Is there anybody that I can funnel messages to? And then similar with suicide prevention, you want to instill hope. Hope is so important here. Hope that we at VA can actually help them. Hope that they can actually get housed, that their homelessness individually is solvable, but similar to suicide prevention, you don't want to overpromise either, right? VA has services, we're going to get you connected, but again, Sean doesn't actually have a magic wand. Next slide, please. All right, next over here, so similar to before with Mr. Renfro, I want you to take out their cell phones. The next few slides are like the take a snapshot slides. First and foremost, if you're interested in this and you actually want to check in with us either with your local VA or you want to know the national opportunities for partnership, send us an email, homelessvets@va.gov. That actually comes to me and a couple of members of my team. We'll chat with you. We'll see where your passion and your heart lies, where you're being called to serve, and we'll get you connected to the right spot, especially if it's going to be to your local VA staff here who, to be clear, are amazing. Like your local VA here, your homeless program is fantastic. Let's go on to the next slide, please. Leave those phones out. Similar to the crisis line, this is the number that I want you to have in your phones as well. Both for if you yourself find yourself as a veteran experiencing housing instability or, dare I say, homelessness, but also more importantly, if you encounter veterans experiencing housing instability. This is the National Call Center for Homeless Veterans, 877-424-3838, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Trained counselors who are standing by to talk to veterans right now and get them connected to VA, 877-424-3838. Let's go on to the next slide, please. There are a lot of other opportunities to make an impact as well. If you are so called to donate of your time or your resources, here are a couple different things that are important. When we think about donations and partnerships, you're probably thinking, well, like it's the federal government. Why do they need donations? Great question. Turns out, being a government agency, we can only do stuff if Congress gives us permission to do it. And if you ever wondered, why doesn't VA do that? Why doesn't VA do this? It's like, we're kind of waiting on Congress to give us permission to do that, give us the authority to do that. So that's why partnership with us at VA, especially in the homeless programs, is so important. There's a lot of stuff that veterans need, but we don't have the statutory authority to do. Things such as providing furniture, move-in essentials, food. I recently moved. I bought a condo recently, and I moved in, and I had stuff to take with me. But as I was building it out, those walls were pretty barren, and I kind of felt like, this doesn't feel like home yet. And it took me a little bit. I put my decorations up, and then it became a home. And again, I brought with me stuff. The veterans that were moving in to housing, the over 34,000 veterans who have moved in for our 38,000 permanent housing placement goal, they don't really have anything. So they're moving into an empty apartment. No furniture, no decorations. We at VA don't really have that authority to do that. That's where we need you to turn those apartments, those houses, into homes. It's critical. Things such as transportation, housing assistance, stable income, all of this stuff as well, partnership with you and your organizations that you're a part of are so, so important. Let's go on to the next slide, please. All right, stand downs. Stand downs are fun. Stand downs are 1 to 3 day events that happen in the communities. I actually did not check to see when the next one was coming up in Tennessee, but if you want to check it out, the link's here on our website. You can even Google it as well. They're just a fantastic opportunity where we provide resources and services and donations to veterans experiencing homelessness. They're always looking for volunteers. Encourage you to check it out for your community. Let's go on to one more slide. This is huge, rent to veterans. All of the work that I know we just mentioned, all of the work to make those measurable reductions, 55% reduction in veteran homelessness, 34,000 permanent housing placements, all of this depends on landlords. The same places that you and I would rent from, these are the apartments that our veterans are renting to. So we need landlords, and we need landlords as well. This last bit as well, this is just a great one, is our housing resources. We stood this page up for eviction prevention when the CDC's eviction moratorium was struck down last year. So this has a lot of fantastic resources, prevention resources, stuff from the Treasury Department. If you know veterans who have VBA-backed loans, encourage you to check it out, va.gov/housing resources. Let's go one more slide. All right, I'm about ready to wrap things up, but before I do, I want to just give you some opportunities of how you can stay engaged and connected. If you found any of this interesting and you want to stay in touch, here's a couple ways to do it. Let's go one more slide. All right, first and foremost, subscribe to our newsletter. Comes out every month, has good news stories, a message from our executive director. If you're part of an organization, a nonprofit, grant notices, grant opportunities, other really fun facts and figures, other updates. When you go to our website, va.gov/homeless, this nice gentleman's picture, it pops up, says if you want to type in your email, and then you subscribe. We put out newsletters once a month. Let's go one more slide. For those who like podcasts or radio, you can also subscribe to our podcast. It's actually hosted by me. It's called Ending Veteran Homelessness. It's a monthly podcast. It's meant to provide, similar to this, a demystified look. We skip over the alphabet scoop, we skip over the jargon, and we give you like a really accessible look into all of this work that we're doing. Our most recent episode just came out, I think, this Monday. And it was on telehomeless, specifically how we at VA have been putting smartphones into the hands of homeless veterans, precisely because, let's be honest, as addictive as we are to our phones, phones are kind of essential, and we in VA not only view them as like essential, we also view them as medical devices, especially when they create access for veterans who are out on the streets for COVID safety to connect with their providers, not just their homeless programs case managers, but their doctors, their mental health counselors, their specialists, et cetera, et cetera. You can subscribe today on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, on Spotify, your podcatcher of choice. Let's go one more slide. I think that's all for me. Really appreciate you coming out today. Really appreciate everybody at home dialing in. We hope that you found this time to be valuable and that you feel empowered in our collective work to ensure that every veteran has a safe and stable place to call home. Thanks.
And let's give Sean another hand. Great job. So, are there any questions for Sean out there in the audience today? If not, I'll start. Please, sir, step to the microphone. Thank you very much.
Oops, I didn't do it.
No, that was me, I think. It's a hot mic. Actually, could we switch? Because this one's really hot, and I talk loud. All right. Great. There we go. Much better.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I would like to thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you, sir.
So helpful. Are you saying that it is possible for you, our representative, can come to our community and put on this show?
So yeah, I'm technically here. And so which community are you with?
I'm in the Murfreesboro community, and I'm chaplain, retired chaplain, Navy, and I'm also currently the chairperson of the Veterans Affairs Committee.
Excellent.
Of the NAACP. And this is our primary goal to end homelessness for our veterans in our community.
Excellent. So I think, Conrad's given us the thumbs up as well. Depending on what your needs are, especially how far along you are in the journey, I think we can work out something. Either it's like this is a more introductory presentation, but we also do different presentations that get more into the weeds, the operational focus. We could kind of like explore what we call the criteria and benchmarks again, all of this is nice, but it sounds like your community want to know more about, okay, what are our first moves? What are our opening steps? How do we need to build out our infrastructure to do this? And I think we're happy to do that as well. We can figure that out.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So that's a great question. So as Sean mentioned, my office, the Center for Faith-Based, we partnered with this organization to have this. But we do this all the time, all over the country. So we will be more than happy to reach out to us and make that happen.
I will see you at the end.
Yes, sir. I'll have a card for you. Absolutely.
Any
other questions?
So this is Brother Newsom. He don't know, but he's a part of the greatest fraternity on the land, Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. Brother Newsom. And he's actually, You don't know who I am, but I'm part of OSL Alpha in Murfreesboro as well. We haven't met yet, but I've been seeing him doing the work. And he is doing great work in our community, collecting stuff to take to the veterans' home as well. And so he's definitely doing that work, and I'll connect with you so that way we can get the fraternity involved as well and make it happen as well, okay, to make it work.
That's a blessing.
All right?
Thank you.
All right, sounds good. All right, sounds good. So we'll get everything connected and
Yeah,
see if we can do
appreciate
something in
that.
Murfreesboro
And
uh,
as
one
well.
correction for you, Brandon, really the greatest fraternity is Kappa Alpha Psi, just so you know.
We'll talk after.
So look, we appreciate all of you coming out today. Anything else for Sean before we let him take his seat? Yes, ma'am.
Yes, Sean, thank you so much for all of what you have presented to us today. I tell you, I'm just amazed at all of the information that was shared today. It's very, very helpful information. I wanted to just say thank you to you for bringing a level of clarity to us around what's the difference between sheltered homelessness and also unsheltered homelessness, but also bringing some clarity around those who have experienced homelessness because of a choice that led to a consequence, but also because of some systems that were in place or not in place that really left them without a choice. So thank you. I think that helps us to be more sensitive to those that we see that are homeless.
Yeah, you could probably imagine, and this is where I get in trouble because I start mouthing off. You can probably imagine I have strong thoughts and feelings about that, but I want to just kind of acknowledge that unsheltered homelessness in particular is a big issue, and we're actually looking at it now as potentially our next focus for 2023. Unsheltered homelessness is just horrible, especially in terms of health outcomes. This is a really, really old stat, but I believe unsheltered homelessness, if you were homeless for at least 6 months literally on the streets, like exposed to the elements, it probably increased your chances of death by like 3 times. It's just the worst. And I think people forget that sometimes. And so it's critical to get veterans out of the cold, out of the woods, out of the rain, and into shelter as a really critical just step, not only for their health, but their housing journey. And there's one thing, you brought up the whole, is homelessness a choice thing? And this is actually a big part of the discourse. Both personally and professionally, I don't believe homelessness is a choice. We will have all of the conversations outside about that. And there's a couple reasons why, right? And I think you touched on this in your question or your comments, which was substance addiction, mental health, whether or not you're getting help. There are people with those struggles now who are not homeless, right? That's a big one. So what it also kind of speaks to is the fact that for those who are homeless, and it's, you can tie it to individual bad decisions. A big part of that, I think, is still that safety net, but also just a challenge and difficulty in navigating kind of society and our systems. And I think it's really incumbent upon us because not only are these America's heroes, these are our neighbors, these are our family members, they're our brothers and sisters and friends and moms and dads and aunts and uncles. And I think as a community, it's important to really, this is where I start mouthing off and BA is probably gonna fire me, right? But it's like, it's important to start shifting away from this pull yourself up by your bootstraps and be kind and supportive to each other. And all of the work that you've seen in those communities, the 83 communities in 3 states that have done it, is that they have all, and the ones that are working on it right now, they've all made a commitment that said, regardless of those choices, we have a community responsibility to help. We have a responsibility to help. And the last thing that I want to make mention, because we got this question a lot, and actually just a recent webinar, right? What about those veterans who, when your outreach workers go out into the community and talk to them, they say no? No. They have a right to that. They have a right to that. They have a right to make their own decisions. We have an obligation, we have a mandate, we have a charge to keep going back, to keep trying. Because if not today, maybe tomorrow, maybe the day after that. Not the day after that, maybe in a couple weeks. But one day, it's gonna be a yes. And if we're not there to really capitalize on that yes, we may have missed our window.
So if there aren't any other questions, I do have another one.
Go for it.
So
I think we got time.
We are always having these kinds of conversations to have somewhere to go when we leave from this place, right, and to be equipped. So if we have a congregant or family members of congregants who find themselves in a situation like this, I know that you gave the number of ways. Is that the first step that they would take to try to get the veteran some assistance with homelessness? And also, how long does it take to actually get a veteran placed?
Great questions all around. So first and foremost, if it's a veteran experiencing homelessness and housing instability, the easiest way is the call center. Now, there are probably a couple other direct ways if you know folks and you know you have networks and whatever, but phone trees are a nightmare. Like email lists and contact lists are a nightmare. The best way to do is call the call center, because they not only have resources that will get them taken care of in the short term, but most importantly, they know how to get them to us, the right people at VA, to provide help. Give me your second question again, because as I was talking to that, I think I kind of just like blanked out.
I'm glad to know
Yeah.
that there's someone else like
Let me
who
tell you.
loses their train of thought. So the second question was, if we find that we have congregants or congregants family members in those situations, and they call the number, what is the time frame in which that we could get our veterans placed in, out of the cold or placed in a
Gotcha.
home?
No, that's a great question. So there's a couple of different ways to approach that, and it's really going to be dependent, especially on your community performance here with I think it's your Tennessee Valley Healthcare. Yeah. And it's going to vary depending on bed availability and any other type of procedures. It's easier, of course, because of normal office hours, that if you're calling on 8 a.m. on a Monday versus like 4 p.m., 5 p.m. on a Saturday. So it might take a little bit of time. I think in those instances, what's going to be so critical, let's develop relationships with your local homeless program leads and your local homeless program teams so that you have those more direct lines of outreach. And likewise, if you notice that as a mission, you're starting to do either your own outreach or your own kind of like cold night shelter, it's even more important to build structures and relationships and to get a kind of a more up-to-date read on what the current bed availability is for temporary spots or resources as well. I don't want to speak too much for the local VA here. What I can also say why it's so critically important for us to partner is that when we talk about the real deal time frame, about actually getting veterans into housing, permanent housing, not just emergency shelter, not just temporary spaces, but emergency housing. Nationwide, we're struggling. I'm gonna be honest, we're struggling. It's upwards to some of our programs about close to 120 days, which is closer to 4 months. Now it varies by locality, and I apologize, I haven't looked up the local stats here. But nationwide, we're struggling. And that's why partnership is so critical. Not only for those emergency and temporary bed stays, but all of the other bits, landlords, right? Move-in costs, move-in assistance, any other prep work as well that's needed. It's so critical. The work that you saw on those slides is only possible with these partnerships, with landlords, and our ability to do these fast. And like our homeless programs, they are so hardworking, they do such amazing work, but they are struggling with the same challenges that the entire country is facing when it comes to inflation and rising rent costs and staffing issues. Oh, I think there's two.
This is not a question, so I just wanted to say two very quick things to kind of answer your former question about what can the community do, and also just to say the point in time in this area in Davidson County is already beginning to get its gathering its group. I think it's the 28th. The VA almost always has a really high percentage of people interdisciplined that are part of it, and they do cold calls. So one of the things is the community can partner with our faith communities to both be active that night, but also to see from that what's needed. The other is a very quick story, but again, it's what can faith communities do? We have a wonderful group of knitters in a very small town, Birdtown's Knitters. They started to do prayer shawls. We said, well, we have people who we have from our bone marrow transplant need hats, so they started to do hats. We said our homeless people need leg warmers and scarves, so they knit these. They are closer to one of our CBOCs, so they bring it to our CBOC. One of our social workers at from the homeless program who goes out to that CBOC brings them back to Nashville. So your community can be creative. Think of things that are really important and necessary, even if they're little things like hats or scarves. And at the point of time, we bring those out as well.
Yeah, no, really great points. And I just want to acknowledge your homeless program leads here. they know precisely what the other like nooks and crannies of gaps that need to be filled. They know, they could probably rattle off a list of like 12, 13, 20 things as well. And just to kind of to piggyback on your comment about the point in time count, and again, the point in time count is an annual survey that happens every January. We're at mid-November. January is right around the corner, so they're going to be looking probably for volunteers to go out and help in a variety of ways. So it's your turn.
My question is kind of a two-part technical question.
All right, I love it.
So what do you do with the people that are kind of in the gray area? Like, I know 2 female veterans, single mom households that are at risk for homelessness because, the income versus rent gap is this wide and they have this little space. So they kind of exhaust all of the programs out here that kind of help. I mean, it's not anything that most of them will do on a monthly basis, and we have issues with those. And one person had actually contacted, she was over the income for a HUVS voucher, and she could only go to SSVF, 1 or 2 times within a year. Yeah. So is that something that's also being looked at when you have those people in the gray areas that are, still in poverty, but $1,000 or $2,000 over the income guidelines for other programs?
Yeah, no, that's a really important question, and we're hearing that a lot in a variety of ways. And you touched on a couple different themes that we're hearing on. Is number one, folks who are so on the edge that they're, like you said, exhausting the different resources that are available, including the ones that we just mentioned on these slides a little bit more. But you also mentioned something that is coming up a lot more, especially with rising rent costs and inflation as well, which is other people who actually do make a lot of money. They actually do pretty well, and even still, because things are so expensive, like they're struggling. So a couple different things, and because your question is so technical, what I encourage you to do, send us an email, homelessvets@va.gov, especially if you're one of that person's advocates or something. We can talk to your, what we call our, sorry for the alphabet soup, Supportive Services for Veteran Families, or SSVF Regional Coordinator. We'll talk to see, what specific kind of resources are still available. One thing that is recently available, sorry for the technicality, we actually offered a new service through our SSVF program. It's called Shallow Subsidy, and in many ways it's actually tailored to the household that you just described, where it can provide a modest rental subsidy, I think up to 50% of the rent for up to 2 years. And I think, again, apologies for the technicality, they recently increased their threshold to about 80% of area median income. So depending on how much that household is making, the income limit might be increased. And so, again, all that's technical. I'm a jack of all trades, master of none. A master of a couple things. But SSVF grant details are not one of them, but shoot us an email, homelessvets@va.gov. We'll dive on in and see what's going on. But yeah, you're bringing up what is a growing issue that we are aware of and are kind of trying to address. I love the technical questions. That was a good one.
I'm going to take my liberty here.
Yeah, go for it.
If there are no other questions, I want to talk a minute about local resources. Before I do that, though, as Brandon and I both mentioned, we are not the experts, but I am extremely fortunate. I was just doing a little mental math when I looked at your slides. I know how long Peggy's been at the VA. So there's more than 100 years of dedication to serving veterans just in this little square alone right here. And Sean, Sherry, April, they're not just VA experts. I mean, these are master classes in suicide prevention and homelessness, so they're experts. And we're very fortunate to have them here. So additionally, if you have an event and you want us there, whether it's our suicide team, our local homeless team, as he mentioned, we got a great team here. They were featured in the newsletter if you want to go check them out this month. Peggy here keeps me very busy at events. She manages my event calendar. She's our outreach coordinator. We want to be everywhere. I can't remember who said it. I think Sherry said it. But if we reach one, we accomplished what we needed to do for that day. That's our goal every time. Sign one person up for care, get one person into housing. Things that we didn't mention this morning, we have programs if you're experiencing domestic violence, our intimate partner violence program, that's certainly linked to suicide and to homelessness. We have programs for military sexual trauma for those that experienced sexual abuse or sexual assault in their military experience or otherwise. Those things are certainly linked to homelessness, certainly linked to suicide. Primary care, mental health, anything that you need here in Tennessee Valley, which extends, I always say I-24. If you start in Chattanooga, work your way up to Clarksville, that's our main area. A little bit in Kentucky, a little bit in North Georgia. If you have questions about local care, I'm gonna give you two numbers. I'm basically gonna cut it like this. If you live north of Smyrna, call the Nashville Hospital. It's 615-327-4751. And if you live south of Smyrna, you're gonna call Murfreesboro, which is 615-867-6000. We've got a homeless outreach team, dozens of folks out in the community every single day, covering 40 some odd counties in Tennessee, plus Southern Kentucky, North Georgia, under bridges, in the woods, in the encampment in West Nashville, meeting with people every day. We've got great partners. I think Operation Stand Down is here, and they have amazing resources, getting folks into transitional housing, helping them with education, helping them with jobs, helping them get into permanent housing, providing some of those things that Sean mentioned that we can't provide by law. I see Whit standing behind me here at our vet center. Maybe you don't want to come to a VA hospital. That's okay. A lot of folks, especially coming back from Vietnam, didn't want to go to a hospital. There's stigma associated with going to a hospital. So we got vet centers. I think Whit will probably tell you a little bit about that. And they're available for you to walk in and work with a lot of veterans in those spaces who can link you to resources and get you into VA care if that's something that you choose to do. So Sean, being a social worker, will connect with us. We want to meet you where you're at, wherever that at is. No longer are the days where we're waiting for you to come to us because, like you mentioned, you might not know you need to come to us yet if you're just teetering on that line. My last pitch is if you are in this area and you're a landlord or you have any relationship with a apartment complex or management company, we can help facilitate, get people into transitional housing and then permanent housing, which is the goal. But we don't own permanent housing. And that is I was gonna say a word, but I stopped myself, a crisis in this area. As someone who was born and raised in Tennessee, left for 20 years and moved back, I was shocked at how much it cost to live in this area these days. And I can't imagine what it's like to be in that gap that you mentioned, especially as rents are rising. They're too damn high, like you said, and they're only gonna continue to get higher. So don't wait until you're in that moment where you're finding yourself standing on the corner, sleeping in a car. Start to utilize some of these resources beforehand. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. My name is Whit Cook. I'm with the Nashville Vet Center. Most of you folks are familiar with the Vet Center, but I really just want to highlight for those that are here that may not know, folks that are watching online, to just highlight yet another resource that Mr. Renfro was talking about. So the Vet Center program is readjustment counseling service, and there are over 300 vet centers across the country. You can find the location nearest you by going to vetcenter.va.gov and doing the location finder there. But the Vet Center, we help folks with counseling, mental health counseling. We also provide connections. If you need something within your local community, such as registering with the VA, help with a light bill, filing a claim, the Vet Center is a wonderful place that will be in touch with all those community connections. Furthermore, we do individual counseling. This is more in the suicide prevention lane. We do individual counseling. And one perfect thing about the Vet Center is Your treatment plan, for all those watching, is between you and the therapist. It's not a set number of visits. It's not that sort of thing. So if you're struggling with mental health issues, please reach out to your nearest vet center. You can give them a call, or you can even walk in and say hi to them and go ahead and get connected with that. They're going to be involved with the community. They're probably going to host coffee socials. They're going to host different things for you to be involved in as well. And then the last point I'll mention as well, if you that are here in attendance, and Pastor Katina as well, if you are interested in having the vet center come to your event, we cover here in Nashville, my area is about 57 counties from the Tennessee River on over to the Cumberland Plateau. So it's quite a large catchment area. But if you're interested in having the vet center program come to your event, I would be more than happy to come and talk about our program. If you haven't done so yet, here outside the west entrance is the 48-foot state-of-the-art mobile vet center. The mobile vet center allows us to have connectivity with our records just as if we're sitting at our desk. It allows us to take our mission out into the rural communities. We do a lot of interacting with local VSOs, local churches. So anywhere that wants to learn about the Vet Center, please give us a call, and we'll be happy to come out and support your event. Again, I want to highlight vetcenter.va.gov. Find the location nearest you, and welcome home. Thank you for allowing me to speak, and appreciate the information that is being rolled out here today. And again, please stop outside at the Mobile Vet Center if you haven't already. Thanks.
Thank you. We appreciate it. Thank you. So this, yes, sir, you had a comment.
I know we're short on time, so I'll be rather quick. Tim Pearsall from Operation Stand Down Tennessee. We're over 25 years old. Of the 40 counties that were mentioned that you cover, we cover 20 of them. Of the 57 counties you cover, we cover 20 of them. We are shallow subsidy grant. We are SSVF grant. We are the new Fox, Staff Sergeant Fox Suicide Prevention Grant. We have an office in Clarksville, our home base here in Nashville, and we just opened another office, or getting ready to open officially another office in Columbia, Tennessee. So we're very widespread. We're covering a lot. If you and your congregates need us, reach out. We've got a staff of over 60 folks that are ready to go. Thank you.
Thank you. You can reach them outside. Thank you very much. Well, look, thank you, Sean. We appreciate it. Let's give Sean another hand. So, I want to close, but I want to thank all of you for coming. I want to thank the pastor for opening up the church for us. We appreciate it. We appreciate the hospitality. Just so you know, this is the Center for Faith-Based Neighborhood Partnerships, and this organization's Mount Zion collaboration, right? And if you go to our website, during actually COVID for the last 2.5 years, we've had 3 to 4 webinars each month, ranging from suicide prevention to homelessness. Sean has some videos out there. We videotaped and recorded every webinar we've had since 2020. They're out on our website on a wide array of topics. And there's so many things I could talk to you about. But please go out there and check it out. So thank you for coming, and be blessed. This adjourns the meeting.